Thank you. Our text today deals with a man named Judas, the most notorious and vilified disciple. In fact, in all the lists of the disciples in the Bible, you will find his name listed last. He's mentioned some 20 times, and every time he is mentioned, words like betrayer and traitor follow his name. But he was exposed to the same teachings as the other disciples. He witnessed the same miracles. He was involved in the same ministries. Yet Judas, for some reason, never was able to catch up with, agree with, or come to a saving faith that the other 11 disciples came to. He never was converted. So what is it about Judas we can look at today to help us with our relationship with Christ? Well, if we look at Judas's name, Judas comes from the word Judah. Judah, we know, son of Jacob, father of one of the most important tribes in all of Israel. But if we look also at the word Judah, we see that it means Jehovah leads, or whom Jehovah praises. So it would seem that his parents named him because they had some great plans for him. Maybe Judas's parents were very religious people. And when they had this son, when they held this baby, they had such great aspirations for Judas. He whom Jehovah leads. Can't you just see the father looking at the son, and he's going to be all that God created him to be? Or the mother, while feeding him and teaching him, knows she has a son that will one day praise God. Doesn't quite go that way. Judas did some things that were life-changing for him, though, didn't he? And let's look at the word Iscariot. Judas Iscariot. I-S-H-ish in Hebrew means man. Man. And Cariot, actually Judas and his family were from Kerioth. Kerioth was a farming community some 23 miles south of Jerusalem. So here we have a potential farming community, parents of a new baby who is going to lead. Jehovah leads, he whom Jehovah praises. He has some lineage there in his name, doesn't he? But we also know that because Judas was from Kerioth, he was the only one that wasn't from Galilee. The only one of the 12. And the rest of them either were brothers of each other, friends of each other, maybe shared the same community, shared some of the same jobs, but not Judas. Judas was from the southern part of Jerusalem, not the northern part, like the rest of the disciples. So maybe from the very beginning, Judas felt like an outsider. Clearly, being that far apart, he spoke differently. He didn't have the same accent. So when he spoke, they knew he wasn't from the place they were from. Maybe this helped Judas separate himself. Maybe this helped Judas camouflage his hypocrisy a little bit. He could just allow himself to be separate. But yet, we never read anywhere in the Bible where any of the other 11 ostracized him in any way. He was always included in everything. We don't read where everybody did something except Judas. In fact, we find that the other 11 elected him treasurer. So if he was elected treasurer, he must have had some leadership skills, or they would have elected somebody else. Maybe Judas even had so much compassion for the poor that they elected him treasurer. Either way, Judas was somebody that the other disciples looked at, and they included him. Jesus even included him. In everything that the 12 did, it wasn't the 11 and Judas, who was from somewhere else, who spoke differently. It was the 12. He was included in everything. And even when he was the one that spoke and said, Jesus, she's wasting the perfume on you. We should have sold it and given the money to the poor. There were other disciples that felt the same exact way. He wasn't alone there. And then in Matthew 10, we see that Jesus sent all 12 out to preach. Not 11 and Judas. You stay back here with me and handle the money. No. All 12 went out. So Judas was actually able to preach in Jesus' name, cast out demons in Jesus' name, heal the sick in Jesus' name. Judas did all of those things, just like the other 11. And then in Luke 6, it points out that all of the disciples were chosen the exact same way after a night of prayer by Jesus to his heavenly Father. It wasn't that he chose 3 or 4 this way and these 2 without prayer and these he had to pray a lot longer for. No, all of them were chosen after a night of prayer with the Father, even Judas. And then we get to the Passover meal. And we have John on the left side. But if you read John 13, it reads like Judas must have been on Jesus' right, because he turns and hands him the bread. He doesn't have to hand it to somebody else, that you hand it to Judas or go across or get up and move. Judas is right there on the right. And there's nothing in the Bible that says that the other disciples were upset at that. So Judas mixed in really well. Even though he had a different accent, even though he wasn't from the same area, he was one of them. And they didn't argue about his placement. They didn't argue about the job he was given. They didn't argue that he was doing ministry. He was one of them. So why did Judas do what he did? He had the training of all the disciples. He went to see all the miracles. He heard all the parables. He heard every sermon that Jesus gave. Every single act of compassion that Jesus did, designed to convert those 12 people to him. All of that he witnessed. He was part of. How did he miss that training? When Jesus offers the communion that night and he says, "One of you will betray me." What did the disciples say? Did they say, "Oh, Judas, come on, really? Are you going to go through with that?" They said, "Oh, I know who it is. Lord, I know it's going to be Judas. I know. I've been hanging around with him. I know what he's doing." No, what did they say? "Lord, is it I?" They all looked at themselves. Judas didn't stand out. The reason Judas stands out to us is because this book that we read, these Gospels, we read the story about this, happened 30 plus years later. It's like when we watch the crime show and they reconstruct the crime. They see things that they didn't know when they were in the middle of it. But when you go back, so that's why Judas said that. Oh, so that's why he was late. That's why he left early. But when it was going on, it wasn't out of the ordinary. He was acting exactly like all the rest of them. So why did Judas do it? Why did he betray Jesus? Well, how about covetousness? He was so full of coveting that he couldn't help it. Well, let's look at that. Jesus was a revolutionary. Some would say Jesus was an outlaw. And when you are doing something that's so far against the establishment, what do? They put a price on you. And there was a price on Jesus. And that spoke to Judas. That spoke because he decided that what was happening wasn't going the way he wanted to. Jesus kept talking about this was going to lead to a cross. Well, that's not what I signed up for. I thought I could get to be maybe the secretary of the treasury in the new kingdom when he was the new king. But he keeps saying he's going to die. I don't think so. So because money spoke to Judas, he was able to give in to that. And he wanted to get something out of these 3 years that he had given to Jesus. Some people say it was out of jealousy. We know he was an outsider. We know he may have talked with an accent. Maybe he talked funny, being the only one from the south of Jerusalem. Maybe he just was jealous of the others. Maybe he didn't get along as well with the others because they had brothers and they had friends and they shared some of the same industry, and he just always felt a little bit on the outside. So he's kind of jealous of that. Maybe that's why. How about ambition? Ambition. He wanted a position, and he wasn't going to get the position he wanted. And so because of that, he could not go back home and tell people that I spent 3 years with somebody and I followed them to their death and I've got nothing. But here's the popular choice. This is the one you hear. Judas had no choice. Some say that Jesus knew all along that Judas would betray him, that Christ chose him for that purpose, that he was just a pawn in God's plan. Someone had to betray Christ, right? Might as well be Judas. Might as well be the outsider. Might as well be the guy from far away. Might as well be the guy who didn't speak like the rest of them. I don't think so. I don't think so. I'll submit to you that I think Judas had the choice, and his choice was to betray. We have free will, and so did he. I don't think the devil made him do it. I don't think God forced him to do it. I think Judas acted for the same reason that we act today. Because we choose to do something. And Judas chose to betray. Because he was coveting, he was jealous, he was ambitious, and he just made that choice. Maybe the greatest thing that Judas had going for him is that he was selfish. And if he was selfish, he was going to act on what he thought was best for him, no matter what it meant. And here he had the opportunity to scheme and connive and work in the shadows and set up a time to meet with the authorities that were after Jesus. We know that he met with them. We know that he planned it. This wasn't just an impulsive move. This was something that was premeditated. This was a choice he made because of all that was going through him that was negative. No, I don't think God made him do it. I think he chose to do it. And so why would he choose to do it? What would guide him? What would allow him to do that? John 13:10 says, Jesus said to him, one who has, this he was talking to Peter, Jesus said to him, Peter, one who has bathed does not need to wash except for the feet, but is entirely clean. And you are clean, though not all of you. For he knew who was to betray him, and for this reason he said, not all of you are clean. Judas was never cleansed. Judas had a sinful condition, and he chose not to remove his sin. So all of those years, and all of those sermons, and all of those miracles, and all of that holiness did him no good. Why? Because he still was not cleansed. And then in John 6:64, but among you there are some who do not believe. For Jesus knew from the first who were the ones that did not believe, who the ones, not one, ones that did not believe? And who was the one that would betray him? And he said, for this reason I have told you that no one can come to me unless it's granted by the Father. Because of this, many of the disciples turned back and no longer went about with him. So Jesus asked the 12, do you also wish to go away? Simon Peter answered, Lord, to whom can we go? You have the words of eternal life. We have come to believe and know that you are the Holy One of God. Jesus answered, did I not choose you, the 12? Yet one of you is the devil. He was speaking of Judas, son of Simon Iscariot. For he, though one of the 12, was going to betray him. Jesus knew Judas's heart, as he knew the other 11, and as he knows our heart. So why preach on Judas? Why is it important to bring Judas into this community of faith today? Because I have to look at the Judas in me. And you have to look at the Judas in you. Are there any Judases among us today? It's entirely possible that there are people that have been worshiping in this church for years. Some that have been worshiping in this church for months, but yet have not actually come clean with Jesus and the Father. Clearly, if Judas can walk with 11 others and witness miracles and teachings and wonderful works of Jesus and not be converted, surely people can come to a Methodist church and listen to Methodist pastors and walk and talk among other members of a community of faith and also not be cleansed. So are you clean? Some may have walked and talked and fellowshiped for years. Some may have heard the gospel, even told others about it, because Judas did. He told others about Jesus, but he didn't believe. And you know what? We can do that and no one will ever know. No one will ever suspect, because we look the part. We come to church. We take part in activities. We even do some good things. But our heart is not clean. So we must become saved. We must acknowledge in our hearts that Jesus reigns supreme, that God is number one in our life, and we come here and ask for forgiveness because we want God's saving grace to envelop us and engulf us for the rest of our life. Because we do not want to walk and talk as if we are saved when we really are not. So clearly, we have to look at Judas, me, before we take part in the cup. You know, when Judas left that night, all the disciples thought that Jesus had told him to go and give money to the poor. They had no idea that he was going to betray him, and Jesus did. So we can camouflage ourselves really well. I was in the some of you know I was in the dry cleaning business for 10 years. 10 glorious dry cleaning years, yes. And there's a saying that I actually had used, because people would come in and say, can you just starch and iron this shirt? Well, no, because a shirt has to be wet to take on starch. Now, I know you use that spray starch. Doesn't work. But if I starch and iron a shirt, guess what? It is still not clean. So I never thought that those 10 years would be used in front of a church in Clearwater. But you don't want to be starched and ironed and not be clean. You want to be clean. So when you sit there pondering, Judas, yourself, Judas, me, and the cup, are you willing to ask Jesus to cleanse you before you partake in this holy meal? And I'm not talking about somebody that just betrays friends or somebody that's willing to take money, 30 pieces of silver to sell somebody out. I'm talking about somebody who for years has lived close to God. Maybe even been where the light of God gave them a little warmth, but they were never all in. Just close enough to feel the glow, but still on the outside. Close only counts in what? Horseshoes, right? And this is one thing you don't want to be just close on. You want to be saved. You want salvation. You want to be all in. Judas was close, but he wasn't a believer. So what about you? What about you? What about me? So Jesus, on that night that he was betrayed by his friend, he took bread and he blessed it and he gave it to each one of them. And he said, "This is my body that's broken for you," even broken for Judas. He just didn't accept it. For you and for many, for the remission of sins. And then he also took the cup. And he blessed it, and he passed it, and he had them drink from it. And he said, "This is my blood given for you, shed for you, and for many, for the remission of sins." And we're supposed to do it as often. But when we do, we're to remember him. So today, I think we should confront ourselves. And you can do it in many ways. But you have the opportunity to come here and kneel before the bread and juice is passed. And if you want the opportunity to be cleansed, if you don't feel like you are, and this isn't any kind of guilt thing, God has spoken to you. This is a time to be cleansed. To come clean. And so you can become cleansed and then take the bread and the juice. And if you want to remain and pray, fine. If you want to pray at your seat, that's fine. If you need us to bring communion to you in your seat, we'll do that. But what we don't want to do is end up close and not all in. You don't want to be starched and ironed. You want to be clean. So I'll ask Rhonda and Cindy to come first.